Before I get into responding to your second and third videos, I wanted to say something more about the first video. Um, right at the end, you mentioned that we cannot assume that nature itself has any meaning or purpose, but instead we have to earn our own purpose, our own meaning. Um, we have to prove that certain things ought to be valued, and that in a sense, what that appears to me to be saying is that we need to create our own morality. And I wonder now, when we're performing this act of creation, what are we trying to prove? If nature itself is meaningless, we too are meaningless. I mean, I know you're not claiming that human beings are somehow outside of the scope of nature, um, because even if the intellect is somehow above and in control of nature when it's functioning adequately, or when the human being has controlled or gained control over the intellect itself, or identified itself with the intellect. Because what I'm saying is, you acknowledge that the human being is part intellect, part conditioned mind, and part um, biological reflex. So the human being is a product of evolution, meaning those biological reflexes, the genetic selection which has occurred way beyond anything that we could ever hope to control. Um, we're also a product of this conditioned mind, which is everything we've experienced from when, well, see, it's tough to draw the line, but we say when the fetus was in the womb, um, it first was exposed to the nutrients in the blood that came from the type of food that its mother was eating, and the moods that its mother was in during its um, stay in the womb. Those chemicals were present in the amniotic fluid as well. So the baby is experiencing life through the mother. Um, and after about the sixth or seventh month, they can start to hear things outside the womb. Um, I think it's been studied, actually. I mean, I'm not going to quote an actual study, but um, I seem to recall that playing classical music for children while they're in the womb is correlated with greater intelligence, greater success in academic pursuits later in life, because it makes sense. The baby is still in utero, but able to hear and make sense of these patterns which are occurring outside, and that's all the conditioned mind is. It's a pattern recognizer. So the earlier you get patterns, or you influence this pattern recognizer with stimuli, the more developed it's going to be at an earlier stage. And we're also influenced, though, by this intellect that, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, Gary, honestly, because if we mean language, well, then what's language? Um, Language is a social phenomenon, but you're saying that each person has their own dictionary, or I read books and um, study the world and increase my vocabulary, and at the same time, my intelligence is my intelligence a function of how many words I know? Um, Douglas Hofstadter seems to suggest something similar to that. He doesn't say words, he just says, as the amount of symbols that your brain can process increases, your intelligence, or the size of your soul increases. Um, so I don't know, is that what you're saying? Or is the intellect somehow just this sense of self-awareness that really has nothing to do with language? That language certainly scaffolds in a lot of interesting ways, but that is fundamentally an add-on to a quality that existed prior to language. Um, but then let's just talk about language if we can't really get anywhere about the intellect, because when you say intellect, it's like you're talking about what I would call consciousness. And there's all kinds of problems when we talk about consciousness because, well, if it's not the brain, if all of this gooey matter in here is conditioned by the world, then where is the intellect? Where is the consciousness? Where is that disembodied, objective view of the world that isn't capable of being deceived by our biology and our conditioning? I don't know where it is, but let's talk about language. Heidegger said a lot of interesting things about language. I posted a comment on your third video, a quote from Heidegger. Man acts as though he were the shaper and master of language, while in fact language remains the master of man. Now that is interesting. He also said, Heidegger, that language is the house of being. In its home, man dwells. In being, man dwells. Those who think and those who create with words are the guardians of this home. So whenever we speak, we're performing a creative act. We are, I think, as you were trying to get to at the end of your first video, we're trying to prove it. We're trying to earn value by speaking a reality into existence. And the question is that reality objective? Can we create objectivity? It would seem no, we have to discover objectivity. We can only create subjectivity. But the reason I brought up your first video at the beginning of my video now is, if it's true that we have to create our own values and our own morality, then doesn't that act of creation require some perception of beauty, some intuition of what it means to create something beautiful? And if it does require a perception of beauty, then we can't still call it objective, can we? But then beauty is not just something subjective. I mean, the sheer fact that we see something and call it beautiful is because we are overtaken by it. It's not like we choose to say that's beautiful and that's ugly. No, if something is really beautiful, it's because we didn't choose it. It is beautiful regardless of our opinion. Now, you know, you run into problems when you start to ask why it is that some people find the Eiffel Tower beautiful and other people find it obnoxiously awkward. I mean, it's a question, but, you know, for me personally, I can see it both ways. It's both, of course, and that's part of its beauty. So, if morality is something we have to create, then aren't all creative acts a function of the expression of beauty? And so how are we still talking about an objective process here? Language is an act of creation. Because, you know, when we talk about nature and you say it's chaotic, and I don't agree that it's chaotic, but I think I understand what you're trying to get at, that nature is something that language, human language, cannot make sense of. And that human language exists on this higher plane, the plane of intelligence, wherever that may be. And in a sense, before we speak, there is no such thing as being. If language is the house of being, as Heidegger says, if all of our acts of speech and writing and philosophy are acts of creation, of being, then before we speak, not only is there not being, but there's not non-being either, because non-being is another category of language. Unless we agree beforehand that when we say non-being, what we really mean is not being or not non-being, but something before language, before the word, before the logos, before the need to make something explicit that wasn't already there to begin with. So, do I think there's an objective morality? Yeah, actually, I do. But it's a transcendently objective morality, meaning we can't reach it with words. We can't be explicit about what it is. It's just the natural order of things before language. But then to say that it's natural or ordered or broken up into things, that doesn't make sense because it's before even that.